Alrighty, so we got our mini project here, so let's get right into it. So this took a lot of time, a lot more time than I expected, probably more time than I had to spend building the entire last chunk of this that I turned in for mini project 1. I was expecting the UI to be something simple and easy, but it ended up taking many more steps than I thought, and spending a lot of time just doing tutorials online, watching YouTube videos. Which none of my codes, directly taken from those videos. It's just little questions here and there. So didn't think I need to document. I didn't think I needed to document those. If I do, though, just let me know and I can kind of hunt around and find those and put those in. But all of my code here that I used is original or based off of the sources I used last time. So let's see. We have. This is our test start screen. That's the start screen, and it looks much different than it did last time. So the reason for this being is that I changed the canvas's render mode to overlay, and what that does, it blows it up to a massive size. I'll have to zoom way out to see all of it here, and I scrapped the whole idea of doing text view controls, and I don't know if they're just text controls, and I decided to use Unity's buttons, and they're not as bad as I thought they were. They're actually really nice. I just, for some reason, I'd read some stuff on the internet where they were a little unwieldy, but they're really nice, really customizable, and I like them. So I decided to scrap that whole idea, and that really simplified the code, as I've saved over here. This is the new quit button script as opposed to the old one. Well, if I close, did I delete the old one already? I may have deleted the old one. Good. So I hadn't deleted it. I just closed it here in Visual Studio. So this is the old script, and this was all messing with raycasts, colliders, things like that, and just never should even went down that road. That should have been just exclusively for the tile touch events. So I cut all that out, and this is the only thing I needed. It was just this one line in that comment there, and that is it. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the old quit script now. There we go, because I don't need it anymore. Alright, and go ahead and save that. So, these are all of our scripts, but anyways, we will go here. So we've got our new UI, and the way this works, the way buttons work in Unity, so we'll look at, say, the quit button here. The text is edited within a game object underneath them, but nevertheless, right, you've got our on-click method, so you add an on-click listener to it, and then you drag the object over here and attach it to itself, and then that tells it like where it can look, where to look for the scripts, which is kind of nice. And so you could use a completely different object, but I chose to use the quit button itself, so drag that over there, and then you select a method within a script attached to that object. In this case, the touched quit method inside of here. Let's see. So that's this method right here, and that will quit the application. And of course, that doesn't work on PC. Also, there's a little thing where it says argument exception, index out of bounds. That's not actually a real error. It is a real error, but only on PC, and it has to do with the way that the touch events or the touch script works. It only works on computer, or on not computer. It only works on mobile. So if you run it on PC, you end up with that index out of bounds error. So I'm just go ahead and clear that out. So that's not actually a problem, since it doesn't happen on the intended platform. But anyways, let's see. So that is how the buttons work. So we got our header, which is about the only original thing on this thing here, and we've got this horizontal, we call it, I guess, a rectangle here. We got this flat rectangle. This is actually a cube that I have shrunk down to like a 0 width in the Z direction, and then just made it so large that it would take up the entire camera. And this acts as a background, and the way with the new render mode there for the canvas is projected on top of this, so this just gives it a nice background that I could probably even texture with something if I wanted to, or even had if I found some textures. So that would be kind of cool, or at the very least it gives it a nice clean background color versus the camera's background colors. Anyways though, that is how that works. And go back into 2D mode. So let's just go ahead and run this. Probably still get that index out of bounds thing, but we can see that our UI looks like this. And if we click the play button, it will actually take us to this test map here. Okay, so we can close out of that. And that is pretty much Text Mesh Pro. It prompted me with some kind of dumb thing with that. Let's go ahead and delete that. Didn't want that in my project, but it was aggravating me about it earlier. So that wraps up the test scene, I think, but if I've forgotten anything, I'll come back to it. So now this is the new test map scene. The map's still the same, the castle and the knight are still in the same place, but the castle actually does something now, which is kind of cool. And it acts basically as a button to pull up the new shop GUI. So there's a lot more gray here, and that's basically the same thing I did on that other one. So as you can see, there's a giant gray plate surrounding this, and this acts as a background. I made it so large, one, because the map might get larger as I develop more, but two, because if the user's, like, hey, I'm going to keep scrolling and see if anything's beyond this. I didn't really want most users to just scroll way to the left and then end up in empty space. So I made that so that they had a little bit of leg room there. They can kind of scroll over and still not hit this nothingness. And at some point I'll probably even cap the camera in such a way where it can't move any further after a certain point, and then I might shrink this whole thing down. But I just made it kind of excessively large just for that reason. So if we let's make this other item visible. So this is what I decided to call a curtain. So this idea of a curtain here, where is that? Oh, I've turned on the mesh render. So this is what my idea of a curtain. So the camera background wasn't working. There's something different about it. Something to do with the way the colors are rendered or the lighting. But I was already using a curtain, and that's the reason for this giant backdrop. But the curtain would be a different color than the camera color background, which was just being projected on this empty space. So I decided to go for just two giant rectangles that would act as both my background and a curtain for the map. So when the UI opens, it's the same deal as the start screen. The UI is actually projected on top of this, but this curtain doesn't move, it just stays here, and I'll have to enlarge it if I enlarge the map. And it's invisible by default, but I just accomplished that by disabling the mesh render, which just tells the Unity it can't render it. But in the code, I actually re-enable the mesh renderer, and that will cover up this map here. And other, panning, zooming, touching, it's all disabled during that time span when they're in the shop. So for all intents and purposes, the map doesn't exist anymore, and it's covered up by this. And since it's 2D, there's no perception of this distance. This is all just smashed on top of each other. Because even the castle's not truly touching the grass, it's like out here in the open. But anyways, so that is that, and here is, I'll go back to 2D mode to check out the touchscreen, but that's how the curtain works, and I had better remember to turn off that mesh render. Although I think it turns it off by default when you run the program, but that way I can see the map. So here's our shop GUI. And right now it consists, there's an invisible text view control that I haven't developed yet, but that's going to hold a counter for the number of units around the castle, because I'm actually going to restrict how many they can buy at one time. It'll have to be 8, because if a unit's standing on a tile and then I spawn another unit on that same tile, the units will become smashed together. At least that's my working theory. So if you tried to move one unit, you would end up moving both, or something. It would get really confusing. So they're not supposed to occupy the same tile. So since there's only 8 tiles around it, you can only spawn in 8. And that's going to be just a handy way for the user to know, like, hey, I've hit my limit, I can't go any further. And these buttons here, this is just for a knight, but there's going to be others. I'll probably go for more medieval units, buttons, maybe some other crazy stuff, but there'll be buttons for each one, and probably 4, 5, or 6 units, somewhere in that range. That way it kind of gives a bit of variety, but not too much variety since it's just kind of a simplistic TBS game. So that's the button there for the night, and the exit button. And this just does the reverse of showing the shop, and I'll get into that in a second. The click events work the same way, and the render settings are set to the same thing. To change the color, you actually have to create a material. So I created a material here for that, and that's how I get that nice shade of gray there. So if we go, I don't know what's going to be covered. Alright, so now we need to try to get through these scripts. I'm going to go ahead and close the play button and quit button because we've already seen those. The play button works exactly the same way as it did in the old one. I just cut out all the raycast mess and put it inside of a click event method for the button. But this is the shop, and before I get too heavy in the shop, I'm going to show where there's some public variables here, and this tells me whether or not the user's in the shop, and the shop script can change this variable. So it changes this to true whenever it's in there, and it changes it back to false when it leaves. If this is false, then I'll allow the user to touch tiles, zoom, and pan. But if it's false, I don't want them to move anywhere. I want them to be trapped right there wherever they're at until they leave the shop. That way that they can't just like scroll way out into nothingness or that kind of deal. And that way, the biggest thing is that I didn't want them to be able to touch the map while they're in the shop, because if they open the shop over top of the map, there's potential that they could maybe open the shop again or select tiles, and that would just cause all kinds of mayhem. You don't actually need this start method. I'm just going to cut that out. But there we go. So that is where I add that in. There's just an if statement here. And touch actions, this one got a little weird because they're not touch actions. I can close that. But there's like 100 touch scripts, all active at once on those different tiles. So I couldn't really reach out to each of them and disable them all. So I had to have a way of all of them being able to know when they should be disabled, and they accomplished that by reaching out to the camera that the pan zoom script is on, because that will always be the same, and that'll always be there. So it references that pan zoom script since it's reliable, and it changes if the in-shop value is true, or well, if it's not true, then this is the touch. So that was just panning and zooming. So I disabled panning and zooming here. For the touch script though, if panning and zooming has been disabled, then we know the user's in the shop. So we go ahead and disable panning or we go ahead and disable the touches there. That way they can't, accidentally mess with all that stuff. I'm gonna cut out this bit too. Find all kinds of things to clean up there. Alright, probably have to split this into a second video in a second and cover the shop script because it's a lot more in depth. Instead of trying to rush through it in a minute and a half, so it'll end up being 3 videos, but I'll try to keep the second video short. So that's how this works. So this prevents the user from touching it, and once pan zoom is re-enabled, it will pick up on that, and it will re-enable touching. Okay, so I'm going to split this into a second video, and then I'll cover the shop script in depth and maybe look at a few more things if I've forgotten anything. Alright, sounds cool.